Our next guest is Dr. Patrick Muinde. He's an economist. He's been here many times before. And we've had this conversation many times before. We talk about public finance management. We talk about how the government is managing our affairs, and particularly looking at the budget and implementation of the budget and the reporting on those budget lines, and looking at our debt and the level of our debt and all those things. And we've been saying, there'll come a time when people will just open their eyes and they will see. Dr. Muinde, good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Do you think people have opened their eyes?
And
yes,
if they have opened their eyes, do you think they can see?
The Gen Z and the millennials can see. And I think those of us who are in the social media, especially on X, the mobilization, the translation of technical documents into local languages. I've already seen Kikuyu interpretation of the finance bill. I've seen a Luo interpretation of the finance bill. And the music, spoken word, poetry, comedy, people know exactly what they are talking about. And they know what is at stake.
So they're switched on?
Yes.
Completely?
Yes.
I think they've been switched on.
For a while?
Yes, they have. It's just that thing that Ndu kept asking. When will it get to this point when people will say, we've had enough of this? When?
When will enough be enough?
Enough. Now, enough appears to have acquired the enough vocabulary. And they're saying, okay, we've had it.
That time is now.
Yes.
Hapa sasa, hapa tumeamua.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Muinde, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Titi, why don't you welcome our guest with the day's proverb?
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week are from the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. If you watch your pot, your food will not burn.
If you watch your pot, your food will not burn.
Yes, and we are not saying if you look at your pot belly, your food will not burn. No, that's not what we're saying. No, Dr. Muinde, you don't have a pot belly, so you need not worry. Yes.
Either way.
In Kenya, we say it's a sign of economic progress.
That we hear it ourselves. We keep hearing it.
It's a sign of a lot of food.
Yes.
What's the interpretation of the proverb?
I'll take it to mean that if you put your cooking food and you're able to monitor it carefully, then you're not going to risk having the food getting burnt. The reality is that probably if you're doing something and you monitor it, there are chances that you're going to deliver it in the right way, in the right manner, in the right quality, in the right standards. But should you keep away from the pot or the food, then it will burn before you realize it. So I think it's speaking to the principle of being able to monitor and be on top of the game.
So I'll ask the question that I asked the previous guest. Do you think the government is watching the pot?
No. And for the last 2 years, I think those of us who have been consistent about the happenings around public policy, and especially at the economic side, then there's been a bit of policy lapse, policy inconsistencies, and lack of connecting with the masses, the people. So we have seen a lot of politics, a lot of lies, a lot of con games. But I've always said that the real side of the economics will speak. For example, you look at what is happening at the moment. If you look at the people on the street, the Gen Zs and the millennials, these are people who are supposed to be fingering computer and getting dollars. These are people who are supposed to be hoping for 250,000 jobs somewhere out there. The fact that they have come out on the streets, it means that they no longer believe those narratives, or those narratives no longer communicate to them. We were taught about 140,000 were in Mijengos because of the affordable housing, but they're in the streets. Why are they in the streets if what they're being told is true? Why are they in the streets if the economy is creating opportunities for them? Probably, if you look at what is happening, the kind of mobilization, the kind of tools, talents that they're using, these are talents that with good policies will have actually been put into productive areas. For example, look at how they have used I talked about spoken word. Talked about music. I talked about poetry. I talked about comedy. If you look at like the Silicon, the Nollywood, these have become multi-billion industries in those countries. Here, now they are being deployed into good use, but in the streets against the government. And I think that's quite a potent power that we should have harnessed to build opportunities for them, but we didn't.
Sometimes you sit and you watch the conversations online, you watch what's happening out in the streets and all, and if you were to pinpoint, because I keep asking this question sometimes myself, is everybody out here for the same reason? Is it an economic reason? And if it's an economic reason, are they able to pinpoint it back and say it's budget? Or are they saying, yeah, tax? But then tax is what is being used to vent out other frustrations for other things. Is it purely an issue of everybody understanding tax, how the tax directly relates to me, and I'm objecting to the taxation because I also understand what the budget and the proposed spending and the previous spending, and I am against. Is it a PFM demonstration?
I think the finance bill was the trigger of what has been happening on the economy. And I said, when we say we can't cheat the economy, for example, when you look at the economic data, the economic survey that was released last month, that survey says the government created 843 jobs, or the economy created 843 jobs. Now, 843,000 jobs is close to 1 million. So if these jobs are really in existence, why are these people not employed? And every year we kind of giving such kind of numbers. Those of us who have been in the formal sector, especially the people who bore the brand of the housing levy directly, now they are going to bear the social health insurance fund next month directly. These people are being squeezed every finance bill. Now, what happened, or the context of what is happening right now was created, or the stage was set up in Finance Bill 2023. Now, in Finance Bill 2023, people went and made their presentations and submission. Now, Parliament and the executive, especially the top political leaders, ignored completely and went and did what they wanted. Now, that caused a lot of disruptions in the economy. We have seen FK, Federation of Kenya Manufacturers, come out and say they lost 70,000 jobs. Now, in talking about 70,000 jobs, these are households, because one person in Kenya carries a huge dependents, direct beneficiaries, and all that. So when these people lose their jobs, their children are the ones who are in the streets. So they have seen it. Now, when the economy is not creating opportunities, because right now we look at the people in the streets, they have actually a real experience, but most likely they have been shut out in a job opportunity. Maybe they have been closed, they have seen doors closed out before them because probably they didn't have some bribes to pay to get a job. So what has happened is that all this pressure has now got a valve to vent out. So, for example, we have said that Gen X are not on the streets, but they are the parents of these children, and they are supporting them. So you look at how people are mobilizing, and even when the Gen Z say they needed 7,000, somebody sent it to them. Who sent it to them? Their parents, the Gen X, and they're the ones who are giving them this money. So it's a convergence of so many things, both social and economic, but more so, I think. What is coming out is that the lies that have been used in the last 2 years have outlived their usefulness.
Doc, it's interesting that you say that, because I'm looking at revolutions that took place across history and where we've come from. And then the ages, if you just look at the Ice Age, then you look towards the Stone Age, and then you look towards the Bronze Age, and then things that started to develop, and human beings then started to innovate and started to use tools, and then we came to the place where now we started to mechanize. So then you had, through that, the entire Industrial Revolution, and then you went towards the Communication Age, which we are, leaving and getting into now the information age proper, where you can sneeze right now and 3 minutes later it's gone
all
over the place, right? But all of these changes, all of these revolutions had different things that then made it get to that point where they said, nah, we can't do this anymore. We're not going to ride a horse, so now we're going to have it pull a carriage. And from that pulling a carriage, you're going to put wheels on it and keep this thing moving. So what would an economic revolution look like? Is it saying no to the things that oppress people in terms of taxes? Is it saying no, be more prudent about your financial spending? Is it saying that we're watching you, government, and we're saying you cannot continue to do this? Doesn't matter whether you were there last year or you're here today. If you're here today, we're not going to allow government to continue to operate in certain ways. We're going to say the member of parliament, this is all financial. This is all economic. We're going to say member of parliament, you cannot continue to be irresponsible, so come and go home, kind of thing. What are the elements that would make up an economic revolution where everybody is economically awakened?
Economic revolution build up over time. And if you look at all the history, you look at the French, you look at the Arab, you look at what happened in Sudan, the economic revolutions are not pre-planned. They are caused or triggered by probably some failures within the political institutions. Because one, economies do not exist in a vacuum. Economies exist within a political system. So what happens is, over time, extractive political institutions oppress people to the point where they can bear no more. And when it comes to economic issues, they have no class, they have no race, they have no tribe, they have no nothing. Because all of us wake up to get a livelihood. The reason why you came here at probably 4 a.m. is not because you came here to pay taxes. You came here because you wanted to earn a livelihood. All of us wake up to earn a livelihood. If you decide to go into business, you're not going to business to pay tax. You're going there to make profit. Now, taxes become a necessary evil because of the public goods and services that you need to contribute to, because you enjoy them when you're making your livelihood. Now, the problem comes when taxes become an entrance to those economic activities. Now, the same way the economic changes take time before you start seeing them and feeling them, is the same way the economic degradation takes time before you start feeling it. And that's why I say, if you look at all these triggers that have moved economic revolutions, it was just something that was packed, and now it brought out what was already inside the population. These Gen Zs were being considered as people who are not connected. But right now they are able to see the reality because the economy is not creating opportunities for them. Now, when we talk about this finance bill, we have talked about Finance Bill 2023 in the last 2 years. There's very little that is being given to the economy to open opportunities for them. And I'd say, for example, if you go to 1 year you are tamaking, you can't see an opportunity. All your people you are with college, none of them has been able to get a fair opportunity. It means that you become depressed over time. And you start losing hope. Now, the moment you are hopeless, the rules of natural justice demand that you self-preserve. So the reason why the young people on the streets, they are now responding to the first natural laws of survival, which is self-preserve. So when you have no option, then you must self-preserve. And that's what triggers economic revolutions. Like, if you look at what is happening, nobody has talked about their tribe. In fact, most of them were in the streets. They even don't know who called them. When they're in the streets, they even don't know who is the next person. But they're able to document everybody to self-preserve. They've created a mechanism where they're protecting one another, they're checking one another's back, and in the evening they disappear, and then you call them again, they're on the streets. So what they're doing is, it's a generational self-preservation. Now, the other thing that we have, the political leaders have assumed, they have assumed that this generation did not have people to lead them. Now, again, the way creation is, every generation comes up complete on its own. It has its own set of leaders. And these leaders can now be created by necessity. Trust me, as this thing goes on, it is going to sweep a lot of political leaders who have been taking dominion or domination of these people. It is going to create a fresh breed of leaders. They are going to emerge, definitely.
Dr. I hear you say, and a number of times you've mentioned what has happened in the last 2 years, but I think it's not the last 2 years. I think it's the last 15 years or so, what's been happening in the country, to a point where even the millennials, as they were growing up, as they were getting into the job market, as they were getting there, they were also frustrated. And that's why it's so easy for the millennials to join the Gen Zs into this. And so it's a culmination. Saying now is the bearing of the fruit of the horrible mistakes and bad decisions that were made over the last 10 years plus, that is coming to fruition now. But it's something that has been boiling for over time. In the last 10 years or more, you have not seen the youth getting, job opportunities being created. You can say, okay, yeah, we actually have a young population that is getting these opportunities that are coming in and they're available for them.
That's true. Because the last time we had a true economic expansion was between 2003 and around 2007. That time we had a true, and you check the data, you're able to see how a lot of businesses were created, how the income of governments were growing, how the number of jobs were growing. So that is true. Now, from the time the Jubilee administration came into office, when they had a grace period, because it took some time to destroy what was already working. And the model they used is a model I've talked about here several times. They went for what we are calling big push infrastructure projects. But how are these projects structured? They were structured in a way that you're using debt. You're giving these contracts to foreigners. All supplies come from foreign companies, or professionals come from foreign companies and all that, foreign countries and all that. So we were accumulating debt that was not having impact
Locally.
And this is a vacuum that now we are struggling with, because now those debts need to be paid. They're being paid with revenue from somewhere else. Now that somewhere else is where we are putting oppressive taxes. Now, during that period, the Jubilee administration probably had a lucky escape, because the oppression had not built up to the level where people can vent. Now, the reason I've been talking about the last 2 years. Now, the last 2 years, and I think I had written about it towards the transition period. I said the economy cannot sustain any more lies. And I had written and said that as the new president, I didn't know who the president would be. That was actually, I think, should have been around July 2022. I said whoever comes in, whoever it will be, they will need to be ready for a radical reorganization of the economy. To give people hope back. And also to deal with the mess of foreign debt-driven kind of model. Now, what happened is that the lies have been sustained. And it's quite unfortunate that these lies are speaking about real issues that you can measure. For example, when you tell us Finya computer, we should know somebody who is doing that. Now, if you look at that thing we are calling Finya computer, the freelance work platforms have been there all the way from 2018. So there's no invention that these people have created. When you tell people that you're moving all over the world looking for employment opportunities for them, we know that's a lie, because no president in the world wakes up to create opportunities for foreigners. It is the solemn duty of any leader of any country to create opportunities home for their people. So you can't tell me, like, for example, in America, either Joe Biden or Trump are worried about Kenyans who are not employed. No, that's not true. They are worried about their own citizens.
That are not employed.
Yes, so there's no president who will ever wake up to go and create jobs for others. So these lies have been sustained for some time. I think what is coming up also, people are now able to connect with budgets and taxes, because the moment they have been oppressed, and I say the trigger was the Finance Bill 2023, because I said people came out and spoke in large numbers. They were ignored. Now, we look at the emotions and passions during the proceedings of the Finance Bill. They were so strong, and I think I had written an article about that. And actually it said, I pray the emotions and passion that you're seeing in this submission do not translate into a public audit on governance and translate into the ballot. That's exactly what has happened less than 3 weeks.
That's what we are seeing now. We are looking at the makings of an economic revolution. You've written about this. You've said, okay, it just needs a spark. And you've said the Finance Bill 2023 was the first one. And because the people did not feel like they were heard by their leaders, they were expressing that frustration again when they were speaking to their leaders. And they still feel, these guys are looking at us like, we're not making sense. And so let's make sense in another way. And probably that's why they're coming out onto the street.
How was this demonstrated? This not feeling the people, this not understanding the plight of the people?
You need to look at how the 14 parents were done. I think the other big thing that people are picking is that every time this cross-region decision has to be made, people are called in State House. The feeling is that when people go to State House, something happens. Now, it might be true, it might not be true. But the electorate are feeling that the people they elected to represent them are responding to another voice other than their voice. And I think one of the unique things that has happened in this current finance bill, there was a bit of mobilization for people to speak to their members of parliament. And that's why you saw people clearly monitoring what their members of parliament are voting. Now, in the democratic structure of our country, the member of parliament is supposed to listen to the ground to go and vote. They're not supposed to go somewhere and come and vote. So that is the structure of a democracy. And this is what probably now is coming out in the streets. Now, the people who are now monitoring and isolating, those they feel voted against their wish, are now actually speaking to their provision of direct power. And I think this awareness has become a bit much strong. But I think also during the discussions of the finance bill, there are quite a lot of proposals that were really touched on the very basic, like the issue of bread, the issue of motor vehicle. It really spoke to the basics of people. So it actually triggered the awareness. The pressure of SHIF that is coming and the housing levy that passed in March, I think also for the people in the workplace, they are feeling it. So I think the environment was right. And I think...
for all these things to happen.
But so they actually fall into place.
Is it a revolution? Yeah. People are coming out in the street. Yes, people are expressing themselves. Is it a revolution?
It is having all the characteristics of a revolution.
Which are?
The mobilization. Now, most of the economic revolutions happen without a leader. And I said you look at the Arab Spring. Nobody knows who was organizing, how it moved from one country to another one. When it happened in Sudan, it was triggered by price of bread. And it's actually mothers who cried out. And within no time, everybody was on the streets. So by the time the professionals were coming in, the people were ahead. Now, that's exactly what is happening right now. The Gen Zs are on the streets. Nobody knows who is mobilizing them. Nobody knows how they're organizing. Actually, I had to spend a lot of time last week monitoring which platform they're using. And I think I've been able to see. For example, you go to X and you monitor it for like 2 hours. You'll actually see a lot of mobilization and how the messages are moving and all that. And then within no time you see the likes and all that, the retweets and all that. Now, you don't know who is sending this message, but people are coming out. You see, the fact that they're appearing on the streets, now it's already taken a completely different dimension. It started in Nairobi. On Thursday, it was almost in... what happens when professionals are in it? It starts taking shape. It starts taking certain control. Now, what has happened yesterday is that the religious communities have been trunked into it. Like I saw the Holy Family in Basilica say they're going to put up medical camp. Now, that has already brought another key constituency and key stakeholder. That's what I'm saying. It seems to be running out of control of the political leaders.
Of the political leaders.
Yes.
I see. But let me throw in a perspective. It's a perspective. Every time IMF come into town with this raft of experimental ideas that they want us to apply, the government's hands are already tied. That's why they're here. They've made concessions. They've spoken to whoever they speak to, in order for this to happen, we will sell you this parastatal, whatever it is that they do. Okay? Do you think it is possible for the government to have allowed this to happen so that the message can be sent to IMF? Because in this particular instance, I believe the unpleasantness that we are seeing in the finance bill has to do with people who have given us money and the demands they're making, because it follows a pattern. If you look at what they're talking about, Argentina, countries where they've had, you see this pattern.
It's true that there's a strong feeling that these policies are coming from outside. Now, remember, part of the Gen Zs and the millennials, they were born during the age of structural adjustment programs. Okay? So that's the time they were born. As the Gen X, we were a bit old and we actually suffered the consequences of SAPs. There's already a World Bank report that was done in 1989 that actually confirmed most of the conditionalities given did more harm. Like the cost sharing that was introduced in the 1980s, it made education inaccessible to many people who come from poor background. It made healthcare inaccessible to so many people. Now, if you study economics well, and all countries that have been able to develop, none of them has been able to grow through IMF World Bank conditionalities or packages. Look at Singapore. We have talked about Singapore quite a lot. We have talked about South Korea. We have talked about Malaysia.
China.
All these countries found solutions of their own. And I remember, I think there's a case of Malaysia where they actually automatically rejected provisions that were being given by World Bank. And later...
But did they reject the money?
Yes, some countries have.
Yes, they have, but China still borrows from IMF. My point is, are there countries who tell IMF, we will borrow from you, but on these terms?
On our conditions.
Yes.
So ideally, because the IMF and World Bank,
yes,
they do not give free money. Rarely do they give grants, especially for a country like
It's
ours.
not their job.
Yeah, so they are in the business of making money.
Yes.
And that's what I'm saying, you need to be alive to the realities of your country and your citizens.
Yes.
For example, these taxes that are coming up, they are definitely quite oppressive to quite a lot of people.
Remember why IMF was set up in the first place. Remember, we were talking about IMF, World Bank, whatever you want to call them. We were reconstructing Europe after the Second World War.
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Yes, okay. Europe got reconstructed a long time ago. Okay. Why do I mention IMF? I mention IMF because, as you say, there's a report about World Bank and the findings of how effective or how ineffective their policies have been. Not much has changed, especially when they're dealing with African countries. Egypt has put their foot down on very many of these issues. That IMF seems, this issue of bread, remember the story of Baladi bread in Egypt?
Yes.
And the ruckus it caused, okay? All I'm saying is, I'm arguing and giving this perspective that if I look at how governments whose necks are already in the ringer and cannot go to IMF and tell them this is what is happening, can they not speak through their people? Because here, right now, we're not addressing the government. If you talk, you are an economist. You know full well how the people in KRA and the people in the Treasury think. They know exactly what should be done. So are you saying that these people who we know to be knowledgeable and well educated come about and craft this nonsense that we keep talking about here?
We need to be careful on that because we need to remember most of the top people in our economic system at the moment, they are children and benefactors of those institutions. So they worked for those institutions.
Yeah.
And many of them actually were brought through. They came through the government system through
they've been indoctrinated.
Part of the conditionalities. So that's something that you need to be alive to. But if I was a political leader, why will I allow a monster that I can't control? Because right now it's outside the control of the politicians. Now, the reason why we're asking is this economic revolution. Now, we need to understand the consequences of economic revolutions. Economic revolutions, wherever they have happened, they have swept away political leaders and political institutions. And you can check in the Arab Spring, you could check the French Revolution, you can check whatever they have happened.
But what have they ushered?
Now, that's what now we need to be careful about. Like now, it's very easy to be excited to be on the streets, to agitate for change and all that. But the other thing that now we start needs to be asking is, if we are asking for this change, have we put mechanisms for alternative leadership? Have we put mechanisms for alternative economic institutions that serve the people? Now, the problem with what is happening right now is that you do not know who is moving it, but it's becoming a monster every day. They're on the streets. Now, if, like look at the Arab Spring, it destroyed a lot of governments, a lot of political institutions. And the reason why they happen most time is because people are dissatisfied with the political institutions.
Yeah.
Because all these economic mess are largely created by extractive political institutions. Like right now in Kenya, and you look at what has been happening on the weekend, they have actually been profiling people who are carrying hundreds of money in bags to Harambes. And the youth are asking, where is this money coming from? You see? So they're able to connect the politics and the economic troubles. Now, the problem is that if there's no organization, you might end up creating more mess, because you might destroy political institutions or overthrow structures that work or that are already in existence without preparedness for the economy also. Because if you're going to change like the political institutions in this country, you can only do it if you're going to have a stability post the change. You can only do the change within the structure that are established.
There.
And
so, for example,
you need to change the people, not necessarily the structure.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. For example, if these young people want to succeed in their reforms, then they can only do it in the ballot within the elections. So
Really?
yes, because you see, the moment you
That's the structure.
yes, you see the reason why I've seen.
And if they decide they do not want to follow that structure, and
No.
they have an alternative structure?
Let's look at
So
the
they'll have
alternative
overhauled
structure.
the structure.
Let's look at the alternative structure that have been used.
Yes.
Most of the countries that have used this are most likely to be inject. And I think that's why we need to be careful.
Yep.
Now, don't imagine the political actors and the people who are profiting from the political institutions are just sitting down and watching. So it's quite easy for them to infiltrate the movement and take control. And you find you fought for a change that will not happen. So they need to be able to carefully monitor what is happening. Now, look at what has happened in Senegal. The young people mobilized for the opposition, and actually they got power. In Ghana, they also mobilized, and they are able to change regimes. If you change political institutions outside the structures, then you also destroy the economy, and most likely it might do more damage than good. Because if this economy is going to continue and it's going to create opportunities within the time frame that you want, then it must change and transition within the structures. For example, you cannot tell us, and I've seen some dangerous messages on social media, when you insinuate that you can overthrow a government. There's no government that has been overthrown through the streets and then add a better reconstruction shortly after. Now, you need as a form of stability for you to rebuild the country.
But then now, what then does this movement then need? Because if it doesn't have leadership, let's assume it doesn't have leadership. I think it has leadership.
Yes.
It's just that the leadership is not coming out, you know.
It's not traditional.
Yes. How should the movement move from the streets to tangible results? What are the tangible results? Let's even say that, you know, you manage to push the government push back so much that they revise the budget and they say, all right, so let's cut back our expenditure, therefore let's also cut back our revenue targets, all those things. So the taxation measures that are being proposed are not imposed. Then what? What does it need? Does it need a leader? Does it need voices that sit down? Does it need a war room? Sort of people who actually sit down and think this is how we can organize and mobilize and then send the messages to the people?
Now,
does it need a vision bearer?
At some point, it has to get a vision bearer. Now, the challenge right now is the opposition is not a better alternative for them. Whether you're in the opposition or the people in government, these are the same people.
Yeah.
So that is the challenge for the current movement.
It's a good thing for the current movement.
Yes. Now, the current movement will need an alternative, balanced, authentic leadership. Now, they have proved that they have the numbers. They have proved that they can mobilize. But they will need somebody eventually who can steer this group. One, balancing between respect for the existing structures and laws, but also not losing the vision that they have.
That right there is probably where they'll get it wrong.
Yes.
Because that's what we've been doing, looking for a leader. The reason why this story of Singapore is such a success story, there was one person, but there were others. It was a group of people who got together under this gentleman who was now first among equals. It's how it usually works.
Yes.
But if there's one person who is a solitary voice whom everybody listens to, we will not have moved an inch. We will have exchanged the same thing and we will be telling ourselves it's different. Let me explain to you why I'm arguing this way. Even if they form their own political party, the moment that happens, the same problems that the political parties have will, let's say they'll experience it. They will experience it. And then it will make it even easier for them to be infiltrated. The norms that we have in our politics, like bribery, whatever it is that we have, will eventually creep in. Now, right now, the fluidity of this situation makes it possible because, again, the structures that you speak of aren't there. The disenchantment is because many of these people are already in political parties. Not that they're not in political parties, but what do they see in those political parties where they are? So when we're talking about change, even the people who are elected, many of them are elected because they have shown signs of being people who can actually do good. The accountability factor, in my mind, we discuss it here very often. Eric is the person who has been talking about this for as long as I can remember, saying, look, if you can get to a point where leaders know that they'll be held accountable, they will lead well. Our leaders know they do not need to be accountable to anybody, and we've allowed them to get to that point.
But you see, you cannot hold accountability without structures. And that's what I'm saying. The nature of, you see what has happened is that the movement in the streets has actually created a certain type of power. Now, this is a power that is not within the established political institutions. Now, the established political institutions will not let this power, and that's what I'm saying, they are not sitting back and just watching things happen. They're already positioning. Now, if you're going to move from the streets to speak to policy and get policy changed, there will have to be somebody to lead that team.
Yes.
That is definite, because there cannot be a vacuum. Now, the reason what I'm saying is, and I think Hamia was in Gen Z in 2002 when we were voting. Now, I'm part of the people who ran from airport to Nyayo Stadium.
To welcome Baba.
To welcome, that was time it was Kibaki. And the moment that wave got in, it's good that Kibaki did quite a lot of good things, but he also did serious missteps. For example, the demon of tribalism and corruption, he let it. Because you remember we tried even to arrest people. Police officers were taking bribes.
Yeah.
We fought it without tribes. But the moment he got into power, he reestablished the old structure. And this is part of the reason why you're seeing this. Now, it's a good thing that this movement right now does not have tribe, because our politics have thrived on tribes and communities. But if you're going to carry on this tribeless kind of change, then there must be a leader who will lead that team. And I'm saying we can recall the MPs. So if we recall the MPs, so what will happen? They'll need to be re-elected.
But Dr. It's the knowledge that you'll be recalled, that is what will make people pause. You see, right now, what can you do? We have to wait for 5 years. No, seriously, we have to wait for 5 years.
Yeah,
if someone knows that they may not have this job for 5 years, they'll think rather differently. There are things they'll do rather differently. If now, for instance, I'm reading and hearing that county governments are being held accountable, young people are saying, we need to interrogate what happens in our county. Our county. We need to look at these things. Accountability is something we have lacked. This runaway corruption we keep talking about is as a result of a lack and absence, a complete abrogation of accountability.
Yeah, but you see, you look at the history of economic, it's like we are saying there can be a revolution, like we are seeing, and there'll be no casualties. That's not true.
Not possible.
All history, all economic history, and that's what I'm saying. People are in the streets, not because of political leaders. They are in the streets because
what would you call this revolution that we have, if it is indeed a revolution? This one.
It is an economic revolution, and I'm saying.
No, what type of economic revolution?
Sorry?
Because the Industrial Revolution was an economic revolution, isn't it? The demographic revolution was an economic revolution, for the simple reason that the number of people, once people could get well, we just increased. Right now, what would you call this revolution?
It is driven by a generation.
Yes.
Okay? And this is a generation that is not tied in our old tribal.
What is their focus? What is it that they want? Because that's what will define the revolution.
You see that until we know they form into a group.
Is it clear?
Yes, it is clear.
What's that?
If you talk to Gen Zs and you look at, let's take the example of the wonderful Gen Zs we work with here, happiness. They do not want things that bother them too much. They want things that work and which works on terms that they're happy with. So if you're looking at what you're calling the Gen Zs and the conversations they have and the problems they have.
So when they're out on the street, what are you looking for?
Because the happiness is being interfered with. Now they're saying everything that was promised them wasn't given. So their well-being was interfered with.
And who knows, maybe you're dealing with the one position whereby you don't have a leader organically. And it could be a different kind of revolution whereby you have a collective mushrooming of ideas that will lead to some kind of shift.
Guys, there's a leader. There's a person who decides it's Tuesday.
Of course, but not in the open. But there's a reason why they're hiding.
And they could be hiding just because of that. But they know that when they say Tuesday, and I send it to among X number of people, those are the influencers, they spread it, it'll spread. Anyway, guys, time is up.
It's over. Just when it's beginning.
Just when it's beginning. But Patrick will continue this conversation. Yes, it'll be televised. Dr. Patrick Muinde is an economist, he's an author, he's a commentator, he's been our guest.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.